All right, welcome back to Defeated Soul. I spoke earlier on, I wanted to talk about the effect that psychology has on society, and so I'm circling back to that today, to that discussion. So, so we've talked about some of the flaws of psychology, but I wanted to talk about the effect that this study has on society, and remember that psychology is based on assumptions. It's not founded on pure science, and the science that it is founded on is I would argue a lot of pseudoscience, a lot of extra variables that shouldn't be in the equation during experimentation. But worse than that, sometimes they're not even doing experiments; they're just doing correlations. And correlations are forms of induction. Induction has serious, massive flaws, as pointed out by David Hume. So we call this the flaw of induction, I guess. And the flaw of induction is that even when you have a correlation, you have no idea that the two have any causal relation at all. I can go address some of those issues another time, but obviously I think most people are familiar with at least the concept of correlations and not causation. But the problem is even deeper than that, believe it or not, when you examine it from David Hume's readings. So you have these psychologists putting forth ideas, and those ideas are very assumptive. Remember we talked about is-ought distinction, how one ought to do this and one ought to do that. But remember, oughts are not determined by science. So people put their faith and trust in scientists, in psychologists, because they have this belief that science is the ultimate truth. But if these oughts that they're asserting are not based in science, well, then it seems to me that the faith people place in psychologists is misplaced. I'm not saying that you should not have faith in people who think deeply about philosophy. Surely some of that might be an okay thing to do. I really don't condone that way of thinking, though. I believe that you should always think for yourself. There is way too much of this argument from authority. And that's basically what's happening here in all this psychology stuff. Is you're getting massive amounts of arguments from authority. People, society, listen to these psychologists. It's based only on authority. They're not examining. They're not questioning. They're not looking at the experiments. They're not reading the journals. They're not doing any of that kind of stuff. Like I said, I recommend against putting your faith into these psychologists. We also talked about how the creation of categories. Categorization is not a scientific activity. I think some people make that claim. I think they do categorizations in geology, for example, when you're classifying rocks, right? Classifications. But classification is an art that arose from, again, the Greeks, Aristotle, the philosophers. And scientists didn't really add much to that. If someone wants to argue that the scientists did add much to it, I'd be happy to hear it. Maybe they came with some consistent naming conventions, but that's not anything to be particularly impressed with, I don't think. So the notion that these categories should be, put on a pedestal because they're discovered by scientists or they have scientific definitions, that is untrue. And so all those categories created within the DSM, for example, those are just, I guess, basically semantics. These are people who have chosen these words to assign these words to particular categories and to these particular forms of personality. But that whole process of assigning names and then also creating categories, it's not a scientific process. I'm not saying it's an unworthy process. I think there's reason to make categories. I mean, I'm all about making categories actually, but that's philosophical. That's a philosophical tool, or if you want, you could say a linguistic tool, really. A tool of logic, a tool of linguistics, a tool of philosophy. But this is not something that is inherently superior in the scientific realm, and that's where I find the problem is people are investing all this faith into scientists who are simply making categories, and just because they're scientists, people think it's better. So anyway, those are the ideas we talked about. I want to move forward into this idea of the effect on society. The big effect I see that psychology has on society is that, all of society is listening to them, and it's shaping their ideas. The media is listening to psychologists, and so the media is disseminating this information to the rest of us, and the rest of us are turning this into our personal truths. And I see these ideas become a part of their philosophy of life. The modern person has philosophies of life that I think are different from the ancient people, or people from medieval times or something like that. People today have a very particularized worldview and philosophy of life, and I think that a large portion, maybe the majority of those philosophies are built on these ideas that come from psychology. For example, there's a belief today that if you are suffering from problems or sadness or some issue in life, the issue does not come from the outside world. The issue is within yourself. And this is a very popular idea, and I'm imagining many of you may feel that share that same belief. And I wouldn't be surprised. I imagine the majority of you probably do. But what's the proof of that? I guess first, right? So there's this fundamental belief that your problems can be solved from within, rather than from without. And this is not something uncommon in. I don't want to say this has never been done in the ancient world either. Plato, I think, asserts a similar view, actually, and so do some of the Eastern philosophies too. Actually, there's almost an Eastern belief system, I think. I'm not well read on Eastern philosophies, but I think that the idea of Buddhism, for example, is that you are in constant meditation, and in that deep meditation you eventually reach nirvana, right? And that seems to be a journey from within for the most part. But that is generally what people feel today. They have this very Plato-esque, they have a very Buddhism-esque philosophy of life, I think, where they say, well, if you're having trouble in your life, or if there's sadness or pain, all you must do is choose happiness. I've seen that very common, actually. Someone said that recently online. I can't remember who it was. It was someone, actually, several very respectable people. So this is not a philosophy put forth by idiots, I guess. Just idiots, I should say. It seems to be put forth by people that are very well respected. I think it's not the full picture, though, and I think that there's a lot of problems with it. This idea that your pain is solved by going to the psychologist. That's the main. People always say it. They're like, oh, you're suffering from depression. You need to go see therapy. That's the answer. That's what you should do. And that's, to me, it's like, man, that's not what you should do. I mean, I don't mind it. I think it could be helpful, but if you're feeling depression, the main solution is to seek friendship. that's what you should do. Is go to the people that support you, that are there to. What you need is love. That's the cause of your depression, I think, largely. I don't want to say all depression falls in that category, but I think most people who are suffering from depression, most people in our modern society anyway, the typical cause of their pain is a lack of love. What they need is love. And what people today will believe is, well, love is not the answer. Love is not going to fix that. The love from another person. You have to love yourself. And that's the assertion people keep saying, is that you have to love yourself. Love yourself. So I think that's so very the antithesis of being a human being. Loving yourself. People that are healthy, they were showered with love, and I think continue to be showered with love by others. That's my observation. Maybe I'm incorrect in this, but the people who I think who actually are truly healthy in this life and have real, genuine happiness, the reason why they have it is because they were loved deeply by friends and family. And those who are not healthy, in almost all cases, have a tremendous lack of love from friend and family. This idea of loving yourself, to me, is just bizarre. Tell that to a little baby, right? Like if you believe in this idea of loving yourself, I think you can qualify it, and I'll go into qualifiers in a little bit, but let's for a moment just put it as a rule that if you love yourself, you'll be okay. Well, if that's a rule, I can think of some counterexamples immediately. Babies, right? If babies love themselves, they'll be okay. No, they won't. They won't be okay at all. And this is the very nature of being human. Humans are extremely vulnerable animals. Humans are massively dependent on others, and not just for food and shelter, but self-esteem and identity. These babies need love. And what happens when you deprive babies of love? They get messed up later on in life. And if you disagree with it, I don't have to tell you. Absolutely, they get messed up. It's like a guarantee. So, yeah, I think that principle, love yourself, you'll be okay. I think I've at least presented a counterexample which disproves the rule, which shows that it cannot be universally true. It cannot be universally true. Now, some people might say, well, it's not universally true, but it, in other words, exceptions are young babies and things. But as you grow, and this is, I think, the typical thing people say is that, you are loved by others, and then from that love from others, you will learn how to love yourself. And that's the thesis. And that might have some truth to it, maybe. But I would present another counter-argument, another counter-example, I should say. Another counter-example. Let's take a perfectly healthy person who has been loved his whole life by his parents, loved by friends and family, and was cherished and loved all the way up into his 20s, let's say. I think this person, one, is in a pretty good position, actually, and just might be able to handle life in the future, and hardships and great pain. And that reason might be because the person has been is now able to love himself, I suppose. That would be the theory. But let's put that person on the moon. Let's put that person on the moon. And let's put him there without human contact ever again. Ever. Again. Ever. And tell him, love yourself. I think he would go crazy. You can counter that, I suppose. And if you counter that, I guess that's the point of disagreement. I'm not sure if I can prove or disprove that, but I think that most of us would agree that if a person is left on the moon their entire lives, they will go crazy. And why? Is because they will need human interaction. This is the nature of being human. They do need human interaction. And why do they need interaction? For validation, to acknowledge their acknowledgement that they exist. Human beings need other human beings. Let's take it further. Let's put someone in solitary confinement. That we have clear evidence of, right? We have people who are in solitary confinement. They do go crazy. They go insane, right? They take their feces and throw it all over the walls. They scream in agony. Could you imagine being stuck in that room and never again having the pleasure of speaking to someone ever again? Let's take another example, torture chamber. In a torture chamber, you're completely absent of all love. Now you might say, well, it's the pain and the torture that's causing them to break. But I think the pain and the torture is almost a reminder that you're not being loved. In fact, you're being vilified and hated. I'm not saying that's the cause of all the pain. Obviously, the torture itself is probably a massive part of the psychological pain. But I think these scenarios demonstrate human beings need the love of others, not just the love of yourself. And this is what psychology has taught you, though. Psychology is the reason. Like, where did you get this belief that all you need is to love yourself? I would argue you got it because of psychology. Psychology told you that whenever you have an ailment, it is simply needed. You simply need. I shouldn't say an ailment. What I should say is, whenever you are sad, they considered it to be an ailment, and that ailment simply needs to have a doctor come in and cure. So if you have depression and you're lonely and nobody loves you, the cure is go see a psychologist. Go sit in some room with a stranger who will tell you to think differently, and that's the cure. And that in itself, there's another issue I have a problem with, is there's this assumption that, my think differently, which means that your current thinking is wrong. So the psychologist is going to give you correct thinking. And the psychologist is going to give you correct thinking because the psychologist knows the truth, because they've studied all the aspects of reality and philosophy and metaphysics. Is that why the psychologist is going to have the correct thinking? Is the psychologist going to give you the truth? I'll be honest, I don't think Plato even found the truth. I don't think Aristotle or Einstein or the greatest minds on earth found the truth. But the psychologist knows the truth? Is that what's going to happen? Or when they say correct thinking, do they mean, no, we're not going to give you the correct thinking as in the truth. We're going to give you correct thinking as in thoughts that make you happy. Thoughts that make you happy. Okay, and I think I kind of addressed this in a previous video. What if those thoughts aren't true? There's this presumption that you are the one with the lower way of thinking, and this person has a higher way of thinking or the better way of thinking. And why would you make that presumption? I mean, why wouldn't you presume that you could go find better truth from a logician? Right? If you want to get proper thinking, don't you think you should go see a logician, someone who has a PhD in logic, or a mathematician, right? Or if for those of you who are big fans of the hard sciences, I guess you go see a hard scientist. I guess I'm talking about physics and those kind of things, a physicist or something like that. Shouldn't you speak to someone like that who might have a better understanding of truth? I have a feeling that a mathematician or a logician or a physicist knows truth better than a psychologist does. So these are some of the effects that I see on society. So love yourself is one thought. Your ailments are cured just by going to a psychologist. Yeah, I mean, life is the ailment, though, is it not? I mean, for so many people, I'm not saying for all people. There are legitimate cases of people, I'm sure, whose thinking is twisted and needs to be fixed. But I'm not going to assert what those are as arrogantly, I think, as a psychologist does. Yeah. So there's the idea of fixing this ailment in your mind. When, yeah, like I said, life is the ailment for many people, and that certainly can be the case. And let's put forth an example of this. As a person who lived in Auschwitz their whole life, life was the ailment. The ailment was injustice, and to cure that ailment, I don't know. There's all kinds of theories and questions. I'm not going to say I know what the cure is, but one theory would be, and a very popular theory, and I think it's a very valid theory, is justice. If what you are suffering from is injustice, then the cure would be justice. But today people are like, oh no, the cure to injustice is go see a psychologist. The cure to the human condition is go see a psychologist. The cure to the problem of evil and disease and the complexity of human pain is all go to see psychologists. No, I mean, come on, guys. There are philosophers called existential philosophers who write about the human condition, and if you read these things and these thoughts, I hope you can come to realize that these are complicated issues, and to claim that any psychologist can fix these issues, I think it's just so bizarre. I mean, I know so many of you guys will probably feel adamantly against what I'm saying here, but it's wild to me. It's not just, I think, fundamentally flawed. It's bizarre. That's how extreme I think. That's how much I believe it's deviated from truth. Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't justice be the answer, or why wouldn't compensation be the answer? I mean, we see these in the movies, at least, and some people might say, "Well, oh, come on, bring up movies." No, really, I think that I find more wisdom from writers than I do from psychologists. Some of these people that create some of these films or these books have deeply profound ideas, and they have a much better understanding of life itself. In many of these movies, there has to be some kind of redemption, or there has to be justice, something like that, to fix the problem of life. Some of us, some people have had things stolen from them. They need those things returned. Wouldn't that make more sense if something is stolen from you, right? Like say love or something like that. I mean, usually that's what it always comes down to. Let's say love is stolen from you in some way. Well, let's start with a car. If a car is stolen from you, we all know that. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that the thing you need to cure that problem is to get that car back. It's called compensation, right? That's why we have a court system. Courts are there to make things just, to return, to make you whole again. That's the term they use, is to make you whole again. And so in a similar fashion, I would think that if love is stolen from you, then you need love back. So why do people keep saying, oh, and it's all just in the mind? Like the answer is, oh, well, if I lose 1,000 things over and over and over again, if I lose all things in this universe, every metaphysical joy I've had, what I mean to say is every metaphysical good, so not just physical property, but rather things that I had in things like love and friendship and those kinds of things. If I lose those things, the answer is to get them back. But I mean, like I said, the modern person seems to think, oh, just see a psychologist. That cures all things. It's just, it doesn't make any sense to me. It really doesn't. I mean, it makes sense to a certain degree. I certainly agree that to some degree, pain is solved by meditation and things, thinking correctly, handling your problems in a certain way. And, I certainly do think that Plato was right about many things. But speaking of Plato, and so this where I think really comes to the crux of a lot of this is I think the real answer comes from his student. Plato's student, Aristotle, I think had the real answer. And Aristotle, in his Ethics, he has this really interesting passage where he talks about what makes a person happy. And he says, friends. It's friendship. And this, those of you who know Aristotle will know this is kind of very core to his belief system. Human beings are by nature political animals. And what he means by that is the word political comes from the word polis, and the word polis means city. All he's saying is human beings are by nature part of a city, a part of this larger whole. And this even goes into his metaphysics. He believes this idea of part-whole relationship, where when the parts come together, a new metaphysical entity comes into existence, the whole. And human beings are not complete. By nature, they are not complete. By nature, they need each other. They need the love of each other. They need it. Without friendship, you cannot be happy. This is from Aristotle. In this passage, though, he does kind of go back and forth with friendship and virtue. It's a very interesting passage. And so Plato says all you need is, truth, I guess, and perhaps virtue. And Aristotle kind of wrestles with this idea of maybe it's just participation in virtue would be enough to make you happy. But then he goes, well, maybe fortune. Maybe you need some fortune as well. Maybe you need some friends. But certainly a major theme in his writing is this idea that you need friendship. He does not seem to believe in the same things that his teacher believed, that you can just go into a forest and meditate for eternity and be happy. I don't think Aristotle would say that. Well, I don't want to get too much into it. There's a passage where he talks about maybe some people can. But the nature of being really human, true human, is that you can't do that. So all these psychologists are right and Aristotle's wrong. I'm not trying to play argument from authority here, but why are we assuming that the psychologists are the ones who are right? I don't think we're questioning them at all. People just assume that, well, scientists, they must be right. I want to go a bit further. So I talk about problems are internal instead of external. So they call this what's the word? Is it locus of control? I think it's the word. There's people, and this is very interesting to me. I've never heard psychologists say that the better locus of control is the internal locus of control versus the external locus of control. But what I've seen is that the common person interprets it that way, as the internal locus of control is the truth, whereas the external is not. And let's just examine that question right there. Is that true? That control comes from you and not from the external world? I mean, if that's the case, for example, there's a theory I hear on YouTube a lot now, is that everything is your fault. Everything is always your fault. You should always presume that everything is your fault. Well, it's not truth, I don't think, right? If a meteor hits your home and obliterates everything you've loved in this universe, including your family and friends. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze here, I think. That's external, right? And so someone might say, well, this person has an external locus of control if he assumes that it was the asteroid. No, the person with an internal locus of control is saying, no, this is all my fault. That's crazy. That's insane. It is. It really is. If you think it's your fault that a meteor came down and smashed your home and destroyed your family, if you believe that, then you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, we can have a debate about that, and I don't mean to sound too dogmatic here. I don't think it's that dogmatic. I think most of you will agree with that. That's a crazy thing to say. But like I said, if someone wants to debate me on that, I'll have a debate on that, I guess. So the external versus internal locus of control. I mean, and let's take it a step further. Well, I should make another video for this, I think. But if you bring into the notion of determinism, determinism is this idea that well, let me get more specific. Let's assume determinism from a physical standpoint. If you are composed of physical things, then your body is governed by the laws of physics, and the laws of physics are not in your control. And so even your own thoughts are not under your control. And if you're thinking carefully, why would you jump to the conclusion that you are most certainly in control when I think overwhelming reason demonstrates that I mean, you can go as far as to say almost nothing is within your control. The modern American, though, I think totally buying into the psychology worldview is saying that everything is within your control, and I think that's largely false and almost entirely false, in fact. This is also starting another thing I see resulting from this view that we should always be responsible for just us and not for other people. I mean, each person is responsible for their own health. I see things like restraining orders. People are more and more of the belief that it's better to by the philosophy that people should leave me alone. It's wrong to bother me, and I want to actually make a whole video on this too. I guess maybe I'll have several videos stemming from this one video here. This is getting to be pretty lengthy, I guess. But yeah, restraining orders are viewed as the right course of action, and I would argue that that's not always the case. In fact, it's becoming more and more such that it shouldn't. People shouldn't be letting restraining orders be the governing of their lives. Always pushing people away instead of bringing people in. Yeah, I think that will be a good enough discussion for this video. I don't want to go too lengthy. I've already gone lengthy on this already. So, all right, let me get more precise, I guess more particular into some of these subjects in following videos. This is Defeated Soul. I will see you later. Bye.